In the far reaches of the galaxy, where countless civilizations lived, there was a planet known for its harsh landscapes and survivalist cultures. This was Zarina's homeworld, a place where strength, intelligence, and ruthlessness were prized above all else. Zarina herself was a product of this world, a brilliant, resourceful woman who had proven herself in ways that few others could. Yet, despite all her achievements, she was still alone. Zarina had come of age in a society where alliances were everything. Marriages, to her people, were not about love but power. A marriage could decide the future of entire star systems, and it was often arranged long before the participants could choose for themselves. Her family, leaders of one of the most powerful factions on her planet, were deeply invested in securing her a match with one of the galaxy's most influential figures. Her father, a respected and imposing figure, had high hopes for her. He believed that her intellect, her prowess, and her potential made her the perfect candidate for an alliance that would strengthen their position in the galaxy. But while the men of their world saw her intellect as a powerful tool, it was also what kept them from considering her as a true partner. Despite her strategic brilliance, Zarina was rejected by one suitor after another. Her father had arranged many meetings with the most powerful men in the galaxy. The idea was simple: Zarina would marry into a family with enough influence to increase their status. But each time, the suitors would find a reason not to commit. It was always the same excuse. She was too much of a warrior, too focused on her goals, too intimidating. It hurt more than she was willing to admit. Every rejection stung a little deeper, and the shame her family tried to shield her from began to weigh on her heart. She had lived for years in the shadow of their expectations, wondering why none of the men could see beyond her appearance, why they could only see her as a reflection of their own fears, not as a person with her own desires. Zarina's race, known for their physical prowess and competitive nature, had always been respected in the galaxy, but it was also feared. The others saw her people as cold, calculating, and ruthless. While her world valued strength, endurance, and the ability to outlast anything the galaxy could throw at them, the other civilizations often judged her race for the same reasons they revered them. It was this dissonance, this disconnect between what she was and how she was perceived, that kept her from finding love. It wasn't that Zarina was ugly, far from it. Her features were striking, her eyes a deep shade of violet that seemed to shimmer in the light, a stark contrast to her dark, braided hair. Her body was strong, shaped by years of rigorous training and survival in harsh conditions. She was everything that any suitor could want except for one thing. She wasn't soft. She wasn't delicate. She didn't conform to the stereotype of what a wife should be. Her beauty, her strength, and her sharp intellect were simply too much for them to handle. Zarina's parents, despite their frustration, remained adamant that she would eventually find the right match. But after each failed proposal, the pressure only grew. The conversations with her father, once filled with dreams of power and influence, turned into quiet exchanges laced with concern. Her mother, though supportive, couldn't hide the worry in her eyes. Zarina could see the burden of expectation weighing on them, and it made her feel more isolated with every passing day. Despite their efforts to push her into a marriage for political reasons, Zarina had begun to wonder if such a life was even worth pursuing. Maybe she wasn't meant to be a part of this world, with its carefully crafted alliances and rigid expectations. She had always prided herself on being different, on thinking for herself. But now, for the first time in her life, she felt the full weight of her individuality and the consequences it carried. It was during one of these moments of quiet contemplation that Zarina's father called for her again. He had heard of the humans, a newly rising species in the galaxy, and one that was quickly gaining respect for their unyielding nature. He thought it might be a good idea for Zarina to forge an alliance with them. The humans were unpredictable and often seen as outsiders, but their rise was undeniable. "You may not be able to find a match among your own people, Zarina," her father said one evening as they sat in the vast chamber of their estate. The room was filled with the glow of holographic maps of the galaxy. "But these humans, they may prove to be a different breed. You may not understand them yet, but they value strength and intellect in ways the others do not. Go to them, show them your worth. Perhaps they will see something in you that others have failed to." The thought seemed almost laughable to Zarina at first. Humans were primitive compared to the other species of the galaxy. They were small in stature, with a history of warfare and strife that many thought was beneath them. But her father was serious, and though she did not want to admit it, the idea of escaping her current life, even if just for a short time, appealed to her. She reluctantly agreed. Tsarina had little faith in the idea of a human alliance, but her father's request was one she couldn't refuse. The mission would take her to the human colony worlds, where she would attempt to create a diplomatic alliance. It was her duty to her family, after all. As she prepared for the journey, Tsarina couldn't shake the feeling of dread. She had never been outside of her homeworld for long, and the idea of meeting these humans, these creatures that were considered outsiders by her people, filled her with unease. Would they truly be any different from the others who had rejected her? Would they, too, judge her on the surface, without ever considering who she was beneath the armor? The journey to the human colonies was long, and Tsarina spent much of her time in her quarters aboard the diplomatic ship, lost in thought. She had no idea what to expect upon arrival, and the uncertainty gnawed at her. Her mind wandered back to the many times her family had spoken of her future, always with the same expectation, that she would find a match worthy of her status, a match that could bring further power and influence. But as she thought about those meetings, the rejections, the subtle sneers, the hollow offers, Tsarina felt her heart grow heavier. She had heard of the humans, of course, but the things that were said about them never painted a picture of true strength or greatness. They were a younger species, compared to the other galactic powers, and still learning to navigate the complexities of space travel and diplomacy. Many of the older species viewed them as chaotic and unpredictable, something that would eventually burn out. But there was something in the way her father spoke of them that made Tsarina curious. He spoke of the humans as though they were a species that could, perhaps, teach her something important about herself, something beyond the politics and expectations that had always confined her. Upon arriving at the human colony, Tsarina was immediately struck by the differences between it and her own world. The air felt different, warmer in some ways, yet filled with a strange sense of freedom that she had never experienced before. The colony wasn't grand or opulent like the estates she had grown up in. Instead, it was humble, functional, and full of people going about their lives with an ease that was foreign to her. The buildings were modest, a far cry from the towering structures of her homeworld, but there was a sense of community and peace that struck her as odd. This wasn't the image of the humans she had been led to expect. She was greeted by the human council members, their faces warm but unreadable. They didn't have the same kind of formality she was used to, and the lack of protocol made her feel slightly uneasy. Still, she remained composed, offering her hand in a gesture of respect, even though she was unsure of their customs. The leader of the council, Ethan, was nothing like the politicians and leaders she had met in her own galaxy. He was young, not much older than her, with an easy smile and an unassuming presence. His appearance wasn't what she expected either. While the others she had met were dressed in sharp, formal attire, Ethan wore simple clothing, dark pants and a loose shirt, his brown hair slightly disheveled from the wind. He looked like someone who didn't care for titles or grand displays of wealth. It was a stark contrast to the being she had been surrounded by all her life. Tsarina was unsure what to make of him. He didn't have the kind of aura of power that others exuded, but there was something in his eyes, something real, that intrigued her. She had expected to find arrogance, pride, or at the very least a sense of superiority in the human leader. But Ethan lacked all of that. He looked at her with interest, but there was no judgment in his gaze, no hidden agenda. "Welcome to our world, Tsarina," he said in a voice that was calm but carried an undeniable strength. His eyes met hers, and for a moment she felt as though he could see right through her. It was unsettling in a way, but also strangely comforting. "I'm glad you could make the trip," Ethan continued. "I know it's a long journey, and I imagine it must be hard to be away from your homeworld." Tsarina nodded, unsure how to respond. She wasn't used to being spoken to like this. The leaders she had known always had an air of formality and distance. Ethan, on the other hand, spoke to her like an equal, and it was both refreshing and confusing. She had heard that the humans were known for being unpredictable, but this wasn't the chaos she had expected. There was a kind of quiet strength in him that made her want to know more. Their initial discussions were centered around diplomatic matters, agreements, alliances, trade routes, but Tsarina found herself distracted. There was something about Ethan's presence that made it hard to focus. She found herself studying him more than she meant to, trying to figure out what made him so different from the other men she had encountered. As the days passed, Zarina began to spend more time with Ethan, as their meetings became less about formalities and more about understanding each other. She had never experienced anything like this before. They talked about everything, about her homeworld, her family, her mission, and about the humans' rise to power. Ethan listened intently, asking questions that made her think deeper than she ever had before. He didn't just listen to her words. He listened to the way she spoke, to the pauses between her sentences. It was as if he was trying to understand her completely. One evening, after a particularly long day of negotiations, Ethan invited her to a small gathering in the colony. It was a celebration of sorts, but not one that Zarina had seen before. There were no grand speeches, no promises of power. Instead, it was just people coming together to share food, music, and stories. It was something that to her seemed almost absurd. It was too simple, too ordinary. And yet, as she watched the people laugh and enjoy themselves, something inside her began to shift. There was something beautiful in their simplicity. It wasn't about power or status. It was about the shared experience of being alive. Ethan noticed her gaze as she stood at the edge of the crowd, watching the others. He walked over to her with a smile, offering her a drink. "You seem like you're thinking," he said, his tone light. "What's on your mind?" Zarina hesitated for a moment before replying. "I don't understand. You have so little here. Your world isn't rich in the way mine is. You don't have the grand cities, the power, the influence, and yet you seem happier than any of the people I've met. Why?" Ethan's smile faded slightly as he considered her words. "I think we've learned that there's more to life than wealth or power. We've been through a lot, wars, struggles, hardship, but in the end, it's the people around us, the connections we make that matter. That's what makes us strong." Zarina looked at him, not sure how to respond. She had never thought of it that way. Her people had always been driven by the need for control and domination, the desire to rise above the others. And yet, here was a human, living a life that seemed content with much less. She wondered how such a philosophy could survive in a galaxy as ruthless as this one. Their conversations continued over the following days, and with each one, Zarina found herself drawn more and more to Ethan. He was different from anyone she had ever met. He didn't see her as a tool for power or a prize to be won. He saw her for who she truly was, a person, not an asset. And for the first time in her life, Zarina felt seen. As the days turned into weeks, Zarina's feelings for Ethan grew. It was confusing, this strange bond that had formed between them. She had never allowed herself to feel anything for someone in such an intimate way. Her people didn't believe in such attachments. They were too busy playing the game of power, too focused on the future. But Ethan made her feel like she could be more than just a political pawn. He made her feel human, even though she was. One night, as they walked beneath the stars, Zarina finally spoke the question that had been on her mind for so long. "Why don't you fear me?" she asked, her voice soft. "Why don't you see me as a threat like everyone else?" Ethan stopped walking, his eyes locking onto hers. "Because I don't see you as a threat. I see you as someone who's been misunderstood. You're strong, yes, but strength isn't something to fear. It's something to admire. I admire you, Zarina." The words hung in the air between them, and for the first time in a long while, Zarina didn't know how to respond. She had always been afraid of letting anyone get too close, afraid of what it might mean. But with Ethan, there was no fear, only a quiet, unspoken understanding. "I never thought I would find someone who sees me like you do," she whispered, more to herself than to him. Ethan's expression softened, and he took a step closer. "Maybe you've been looking in the wrong places." Zarina's heart raced. She didn't know what to say, but in that moment she realized that for the first time she wasn't alone. She wasn't trapped by the expectations of her family or the cruel judgments of her people. She was free, if only for a moment, to be herself. And in that fleeting moment, Zarina began to understand something about the humans, something she hadn't realized before. They didn't need grand displays of power or wealth to feel complete. They had something deeper, something that went beyond strength and intellect. They had a capacity for kindness, for connection, for love, things that she had never allowed herself to fully embrace. Zarina had never imagined that her mission would bring her to this point. The weeks had passed quickly, each day filled with meetings, diplomacy, and discussions. But in the quiet moments between all the official duties, There was something that had changed within her. The galaxy had always been a place of power struggles and politics, but with Ethan, she had seen a different side of the universe, one where the value of connection and trust far outweighed wealth and influence. Her time on the human colony had been eye-opening. It had shown her a life that was simple, yet full of meaning. She had always believed that strength came from power, from dominance, from being the strongest in the room. But Ethan had shown her that true strength lay in kindness, in the ability to love, and in the courage to show vulnerability. Yet, as the days passed, the reality of her situation began to creep back in. The mission she had been sent on, to forge an alliance between her people and the humans, was still a priority. She could feel the pressure building again. The delicate balance of power was never far from her mind, and the reality of what her family expected from her was still present, hovering like a shadow over everything. Czarina had to leave the colony soon. The political situation on her homeworld was worsening, and her presence was required back home to finalize the alliances that would secure her family's position. But every time she thought about leaving, a heavy weight settled in her chest. She had come to care for Ethan in ways she hadn't anticipated. In his presence, she had felt a kind of peace, a comfort she hadn't known she needed. And yet the mission was important. Her family depended on her. She couldn't ignore that. The night before she was scheduled to depart, Ethan asked her to meet him outside the colony's main settlement. The sky was clear, the stars shining brightly overhead, and there was a gentle breeze in the air. As she approached the small clearing where they had agreed to meet, she saw Ethan standing near a cluster of trees. He was looking up at the sky, his hands tucked into his pockets, and there was something in his posture that made her heart skip a beat. "Czarina," he said softly when he saw her approach, turning to face her. His expression was serious, but his eyes were warm, as always. "You know I'll be leaving tomorrow," Czarina said, trying to keep her voice steady, though she could feel the sadness bubbling up inside her. "I need to go back. My family needs me." Ethan nodded slowly. I knew at the moment you arrived. You're not like us. You're bound by duty in a way that I can't fully understand." Czarina hesitated. She had never been good at talking about her emotions, but with Ethan it was different. He made it easier somehow, even though the words still felt heavy on her tongue. "I don't want to go back," she admitted quietly. "Not now, not when I feel like this." Ethan stepped closer, his eyes searching hers as though he was trying to read the depths of her soul. "Like what?" "Like I've found something I never knew I needed," Czarina said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I never thought I would feel this way. You make me feel like I can be more than what I was taught to be. You make me feel like I'm enough. And that's something I've never felt before." The words hung in the air between them, raw and vulnerable. Ethan reached out and gently cupped her face, his touch soft, like he was afraid to break the moment. "You are enough, Czarina. You've always been enough. I see you for who you truly are, someone strong, brilliant, capable, and I love you for that." Czarina's breath caught in her throat. She had never allowed herself to imagine that someone could love her for the very things that others had seen as flaws. She had always been taught that love came from power, status, or strength, things that she had in abundance. But Ethan's love was different. It was unconditional, pure, and based on something deeper than titles or influence. She closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of everything she had been through, the rejections, the expectations, the loneliness. And now, standing here with Ethan, she felt something she had never known before, peace. "I've never felt this way," Czarina confessed. "Not with anyone, but you make me feel like I can let go of everything I've been holding on to. I don't want to be alone anymore." "Not when I know that I can be with you." Ethan smiled, a tender smile that reached his eyes and softened his features. "Then don't be," he said simply. "Don't be alone. Stay with me, stay here with me, and let's build something together." Czarina felt her heart race. She had never imagined that she would find someone like Ethan. In the galaxy's vast expanse, where alliances were built on power and wealth, this was the one thing she had never expected, a love that had nothing to do with status. A love that simply existed purely and unconditionally. "But my family, my duty," Czarina started, but Ethan placed a finger gently on her lips. "Your family may have their expectations, but what about your expectations? What do you want, Czarina? What is it that you truly want?" The question hung in the air, and for the first time, Czarina realized that she had never asked herself that question. She had always done what was expected of her. She had always been the dutiful daughter, the powerful ally, the perfect candidate for marriage. But now, standing here with Ethan, she realized that the life she had been living was not hers. It was the life that had been carved out for her by others. She took a deep breath, her mind racing. "I want to be with you," she said finally, the words feeling as if they had been waiting for years to escape. "I want to stay. I want to be with you, Ethan. I want to build a life with you." Ethan's smile widened, and he took her hands in his, squeezing them gently. "Then stay," he said. "Stay with me. We'll face whatever comes together as equals, as partners. I can't promise that things will be easy, but I can promise that I'll be there every step of the way. And I'll love you no matter what." Zarina felt tears prickle at the corners of her eyes, but this time they weren't tears of sorrow. They were tears of relief. She had spent so long carrying the weight of her family's expectations, the pressure to conform to a life that wasn't her own. But now, in this moment, she felt lighter than she ever had before. Without thinking, she stepped closer to Ethan, standing on her tiptoes to kiss him. It was a kiss full of emotion, of everything they had been through and everything they had yet to face. When they pulled away, she saw the same hope reflected in his eyes, and then in a moment of quiet certainty, she knew what she had to do. Zarina looked at Ethan, her heart pounding in her chest. "Ethan, will you marry me?" she asked, her voice filled with emotion. "Will you marry me and let's face the galaxy together?" For a moment, Ethan didn't say anything. He simply stared at her as if trying to process the weight of her words. Then slowly, a wide smile spread across his face. "Yes," he said, his voice filled with joy and love. "Yes, Zarina, I will marry you." In that moment, Zarina felt a rush of emotions flood through her. Relief, happiness, love. The galaxy could be as chaotic and unpredictable as it wanted, but for the first time she felt as though she had found her place. She had found her home, not in the power and politics of her people, but in the love she shared with a human who saw her for who she truly was. The universe, with all its complexities and conflicts, would always be there. But for now, Zarina was content. She had found the one thing she had always been searching for, someone who understood her, loved her, and saw her as an equal. And with Ethan by her side, she knew that no matter what the future held, they would face it together.